everyone, once again welcome to GYANKALYAN. I am Gourisikha Borgohain and in this video I will be talking about the second chapter of the book Snapshots for the students of class 11 General English. The name of the chapter is The Address, and I hope this video will help you in some way or the other. If you have any queries or doubts regarding this chapter, make sure to comment down in the comment box. So let's begin with the chapter.
The Address. It was written by Marga Minko. This short story is a poignant account of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. When she finds them, the objects evoke memories of her earlier life. However, she decides to leave them all behind and resolves to move on. So this chapter is basically about a girl who returns to her homeland after war in Holland. And from this we can understand that she had lost her family during the war and she was away from home when the war took place. She comes in search of things or objects that belonged to her mother earlier. And when she finds them, every object reminded her some memories that she shared once. But she leaves them all behind and moves on. Okay, so let's begin now. Do you still know me? I said. The woman looked at me searchingly. She had opened the door a chink. I came closer and stood on the step. No, I don't know you. I am Mrs. S. daughter. The author or the daughter visits a friend of her mother and asks if she knows her. Then the woman who stood with the door open chink, মানে একদম অলপকে খুলি থৈছিলে দরজাখন, and ক'লে যে চিনি নাপাওঁ বুলি. And then the daughter introduces herself as daughter of Mrs. S. She held her hand on the door as though she wanted to prevent it opening any further. Her face gave absolutely no sign of recognition. She kept staring at me in silence. মানুহগৰাকীয়ে চিনি নোপোৱাৰ ভাও ধৰে আৰু ছোৱালীজনীক মনে মনে চাই থাকে. Then, perhaps I was mistaken. I thought, perhaps it isn't her. I had seen her only once, fleetingly, and that was years ago. It was most probable that I had rung the wrong bell. The woman let go of the door and stepped to the side. She was wearing my mother's green knitted cardigan. The wooden buttons were rather pale from washing. She saw that I was looking at the cardigan and half hid herself again behind the door. But I knew now that I was right. ছোৱালীজনীয়ে এখন্তেকৰ কাৰণে ভাবে যে ভুল জেগাত আহিল নেকি বুলি, কাৰণ তেওঁ সেই মানুহগৰাকী অকল এবাৰহে দেখিছিল. বাট ছোৱালীজনীয়ে মন কৰে যে মানুহগৰাকীয়ে ছোৱালীজনীৰ মাকৰ কাপোৰ পিন্ধি আছিল আৰু ছোৱালীজনীয়ে কাপোৰটো চাই থকা দেখি বুলি গম পাই মানুহগৰাকীয়ে দৰজাখনৰ আঁৰত লুকাই দিয়ে. আৰু তেতিয়া ছোৱালীজনীয়ে চিয়ৰ হৈ যায় যে তেওঁ ঠিক জেগাতে আহিছে বুলি. Well, you knew my mother, I asked. Have you come back? Said the woman. I thought that no one had come back, only me. আকৌ ছোৱালীজনীয়ে প্ৰশ্ন কৰে যে আপুনিতো মোৰ মাক চিনি পাইছিল বুলি, আৰু তেতিয়া মানুহগৰাকীয়ে প্ৰশ্ন কৰে যে তুমি ঘূৰি আহিলা নেকি বুলি, আৰু কয় যে কোনো ঘূৰি অহা নাই বুলি ভাবিছিলোঁ. আৰু ছোৱালীজনীয়ে তেতিয়া ৰিপ্লাই দিয়ে যে অনলি মি, অকল মইহে আহিছোঁ মানে. A door opened and closed in the passage behind her. A musty smell emerged. I regret I cannot do anything for you. I have come here specially on the train. I wanted to talk to you for a moment. It is not convenient for me now, said the woman. I can't see you another time. She nodded and cautiously closed the door as though no one inside the house should be disturbed. ছোৱালীজনীয়ে কয় যে তেওঁৰ লগত কথা পাতিব বিচাৰে বুলি, বাট মানুহগৰাকীয়ে নোৱাৰো বুলি কৈ দৰজাখন মাৰি দিয়ে. I stood where I was on the step. The curtain in front of the bay window moved. Someone stared at me and would then have asked what I wanted. Oh, nothing. The woman would have said it was nothing. I looked at the nameplate again. Darling, it said, in black letters on white enamel, and on the jamb, a bit higher, the number 46. দৰজাখন মৰাৰ পিছত ছোৱালীজনীয়ে বাহিৰৰ পৰা দেখে যে ভিতৰৰ ফালৰ পৰা কোনোবা বেলেগে ষ্টেয়াৰ কৰি আছিলে। দেন ছোৱালীজনীয়ে নেম প্লেটখনলৈ চাই ঘৰটোৰ আগত লগোৱা, আৰু তাত লিখা আছিল ডাৰ্লিং বুলি ইন ব্লেক লেটাৰ্ছ অন হোৱাইট এনামেল। এনামেল মানে এনেকুৱা গ্লসি মেটেল, তাৰ ওপৰত লিখা আছিলে ডাৰ্লিং বুলি। As I walked slowly back to the station, I thought about my mother, who had given me the address years ago. It had been in the first half of the war. I was home for a few days, and it struck me immediately that something or other about the rooms had changed. I missed various things my mother was surprised I should have noticed so quickly. Then she told me about Mrs. Darling. I had never heard of her, but apparently she was an old acquaintance of my mother, whom she hadn't seen for years. She had suddenly turned up and renewed their contact. Since then, she had come regularly. ছোৱালীজনী ষ্টেচনলৈ গৈ থাকোঁতে মনত পৰে যে মিছেছ ডৰ্লিঙৰ এড্ৰেছটো মাকে এদিন তাইক কৈছিল বুলি। যেতিয়া তাই মাকৰ লগত ঘৰত আছিল তেতিয়া তাই মন কৰে যে ঘৰত বহুত আগতে থকা বস্তুবোৰ নাইকিয়া হৈ আছিল। তাই মাকক সোধাত মাকে ডৰ্লিঙৰ কথা কয়, আৰু ডৰ্লিঙৰ কথা মাকৰ মুখত ইমান শুনা নাছিল যদিও মাকৰ পৰা গম পাইছিল যে তেওঁ মাকৰ পুৰণা লগৰ আছিল বুলি, আৰু ডৰ্লিঙে মাকক তাই নথকা অৱস্থাত ৰেগুলাৰ লগ কৰিব আহিছিল বুলি। Every time she leaves here, she takes something home with her, said my mother. She took all the table silver in one go, and then the antique plates that hung there. She had trouble lugging those large vases, and I'm worried she got a crick in her back from the crockery. My mother shook her head pityingly, and I would never have dared ask her. She suggested it to me herself. She even insisted she wanted to save all my nice things. If we have to leave here, we shall lose everything, she says. তেতিয়া মাকে ছোৱালীজনীক কৈছিল যে মিছেছ ডৰ্লিং যেতিয়া আহিছিল তেতিয়াই কিবা নহয় কিবা এটা লৈ গৈছিল। এণ্টিক প্লেটছ, টেবল, চিলভাৰ ভেছেছ, এইবোৰ চব লৈ গৈছিল, আৰু মাকৰ সেইটো সময়ত দুখো লাগিছিল যদিও ডৰ্লিঙক মাকে জোৰ কৰি কৈছিল যে তেওঁ এণ্টিক বস্তুবোৰ ভালকৈ ৰাখিব বিচাৰে বুলি। ডৰ্লিঙে ইমানেই জোৰ কৰিছিল মাকক যে মাকে একো ক'ব পৰা নাছিল বস্তুবোৰ নি থাকোঁতেও। Have you agreed with her that she should keep everything? I asked. As if that's necessary, my mother cried. It would simply be an insult to talk like that, and think about the risk she is running each time she goes out of our door with a full suitcase or bag. ছোৱালীজনীয়ে মাকক যেতিয়া সুধিছিল তেওঁ কি ডৰ্লিঙক চব বস্তু থ'ব দিব নেকি বুলি, তেতিয়া মাকে কান্দে আৰু কয় যে ইট উইল বি এন ইনচাল্ট টু টক লাইক ডেট, আৰু ডৰ্লিঙৰ কথা কয় যে সদায় বেগ অৰ চুটকেছ ফুল কৰি কৰি বস্তু লৈ যায় বুলি। My mother seemed to notice that I was not entirely convinced. She looked at me reprovingly, and after that we spoke no more about it. Meanwhile, I had arrived at the station without having paid much attention to things on the way. I was walking in familiar places again for the first time since the war, but I did not want to go further than was necessary. I didn't want to upset myself with the sight of streets and houses full of memories from a precious time. আৰু ডৰ্লিঙৰ কথাবোৰ শুনি ছোৱালীজনীয়ে ভাল পোৱা নাছিল বুলি মাকে মন কৰিছিল, সেইকাৰণে সেইবোৰ কথা আৰু পতা হোৱা নাছিল। আগৰ কথাবোৰ মনত পেলাই পেলাই ছোৱালীজনী ষ্টেচন পাইছিলহে, আৰু যুদ্ধৰ পিছত প্ৰথমবাৰ আপোন জেগাখিনি চাইছিল, আৰু সেইবোৰ চাই আগৰ মেমৰিজবোৰ মনত পেলাই দুখ কৰিবলৈ মন কৰা নাছিল, সেইকাৰণে সেইবোৰ জেগাবোৰ বেছিকৈ নেচেচেৰিবোৰ জেগালৈহে গৈছিল, এনে আননেচেচেৰি ক'তো যোৱা নাছিল। In the train back, I saw Mrs. Darling in front of me again as I had the first time I met her. It was the morning after the day my mother had told me about her. I had got up late and coming downstairs, I saw my mother about to see someone out, a woman with a broad bag. "There is my daughter," said my mother. She beckoned to me. The woman nodded and picked up the suitcase under the coat rack. She wore a brown coat and a shapeless hat. "Does she live far away?" I asked, seeing the difficulty she had going out of the house with the heavy case. "In Marconi Street," said my mother. "Number 46, remember that." So the girl again remembers Mrs. Darling about her first meet with her and how she was told by her mother to remember the address of Mrs. Darling, and the address was in Marconi Street, number 46, and she was asked by her mother to remember that address. I had remembered it, but I had waited a long time to go there. Initially, after the liberation, I was absolutely not interested in all that stored stuff, and naturally, I was also rather afraid of it, afraid of being confronted with things that had belonged to a connection that no longer existed, which were hidden away in cupboards and boxes and waiting in vain until they were put back in their place again, which had endured all those years because they were things. So after the death of her mother, she didn't want to see the belongings of her, which will sadden her more, because it will sadden her more. The daughter remembers the address and she wanted to go there for a long time. আৰু মাকৰ মৃত্যুৰ পিছত তাই ঘৰটো বস্তুবোৰলৈ মনত পৰা নাছিল আৰু চাব ইচ্ছা কৰা নাছিল, কিয়নো ঘৰৰ সকলোবোৰ বস্তুৰ লগত মাকৰ স্মৃতি জড়িত হৈ আছিল। But gradually everything became more normal again. Bread was getting to be lighter color, there was a bed you could sleep in unthreatened, a room with a view you were more used to glancing each day. And one day I noticed I was curious about all the possessions that must still be at that address. I wanted to see them, touch and remember. But দুদিনমানৰ পিছত সব নৰ্মেল হৈ যায় আৰু ছোৱালীজনী মাকৰ বিলংগিংছবোৰ চাবলৈ আৰু চুই চাবলৈ চাই মনত পেলাবলৈ মন যায় আৰু সেই তেতিয়া মাকে কৈ থৈ যোৱা এড্ৰেছটো মনত পেলায় আৰু সেই জেগাত উপস্থিত হৈ গৈ। After my first visit in vain to Mrs. Darling's house, I decided to try a second time. Now a girl of about 15 opened the door to me. I asked her if her mother was at home. "No," she said, my mother is doing an errand." "No matter," I said, "I will wait for her." প্ৰথমবাৰটো ছোৱালীজনীয়ে মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ ঘৰৰ ভিতৰত সোমাব পৰা নাছিল, so she decided to try again for a second time. আৰু যেতিয়া যায় তেতিয়া মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ ছোৱালীজনীক লগ পায় আৰু মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ ছোৱালীজনীয়ে ভিতৰত মাতে আৰু কয় যে মাক নাই বুলি, ক'ৰবাত ওলাই গৈছে বুলি কয় আৰু জীয়েকজনী এই ছোৱালীজনীয়ে কয় যে ঠিক আছে তেওঁ ৰ'ব তেওঁ মাকক লগ কৰিবলৈ। I followed the girl along the passage. An old-fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder hung next to a mirror. We never used it because it was much more cumbersome than a single candlestick. মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ ছোৱালীজনী যেতিয়া ভিতৰলৈ মাতে তাই মন কৰে এটা কেণ্ডেল হোল্ডাৰ আৰু এটা আছিল এখন আইনা ওচৰত আৰু সেইটো দেখি তাই মনত পৰে যে সেইটো তাহাঁতৰ আছিল আৰু সেইটো তাহাঁতি ইউজ কৰা নাছিল বিকজ ইট ৱাজ নট ইজি টু ইউজ আৰু সেইটোতকৈ মানে তাহাঁতি ছিংগল কেণ্ডেল হোল্ডাৰে আৰু কেণ্ডেল ষ্টিকে ইউজ কৰিছিল বিকজ সেইটো ডাঙৰ আছিল আৰু ইট ৱাজ নট ইজি টু মেনেজ। "Won't you sit down?" asked the girl. She held open the door of the living room and I went inside past her. I stopped horrified. I was in a room I knew and did not know. I found myself in the midst of things I did want to see again but which oppressed me in the strange atmosphere. Because of the tasteless way everything was arranged, because of the ugly furniture or the muggy smell that hung there, I don't know, but I scarcely dared to look around me. The girl moved a chair. I sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. I rubbed it. My fingers grew warm from rubbing. I followed the lines of the pattern. Somewhere on the edge there should be a burn mark that had never been repaired. তাৰ পিছত মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ জীয়েকে বহিবলৈ কয় আৰু ছোৱালীজনী শ্বক হৈ যায় ছাৰাউণ্ডিংটো দেখিলে বিকজ চব বস্তুৱে আছিল তাহাঁতৰ ঘৰৰ পৰা অনা বাট শ্বি ফাউণ্ড ইট টেষ্টলেছ এজ ইট ৱাজন্ট এৰেঞ্জ প্ৰপাৰলি শ্বি ৱাজ লাইক স্কেয়াৰ্ড টু লুক এৰাউণ্ড বিকজ শ্বি চ so many things that belong to them once upon a time. She talks about a woolen tablecloth which had a burn mark that had never been repaired আৰু সেইখনো দেখি পেলাই চাই যে সেই burn markটো আছে that was never been repaired. My mother will be back soon, said the girl. I have already made tea for her. Will you have a cup? Thank you. I looked up. The girl put cups ready on the tea table. She had a broad back, just like her mother. She poured tea from a white pot. All it had was a gold border on the lid. I remembered. She opened a box and took some spoons out. Mrs. Darling's daughter, who had brought back just like her mother, asked her to have a cup of coffee. And the girl then noticed the cups and the teapot which had a golden border. And the girl remembered every single thing. That's a nice box. I heard my own voice. It was a strange voice, as though each sound was different in this room. Oh, you know about them? She had turned round and brought me my tea. She laughed. My mother says it is antique. We have got lots more. She pointed round the room. See for yourself. So we can see how much the girl was lost when she entered the house of Mrs. Darling because she saw almost every belongings of her mother in Mrs. Darling's house. And she spoke about a box which Mrs. Darling's daughter opened to take out some spoons, and she commented it as that's a nice box. Then Mrs. Darling's daughter speaks about her mother, who considers them as antique. She also says them that they have a lot more of this and asks her to check it herself. I had no need to follow her hand. I knew which things she meant. I just looked at the still life over the tea table. As a child, I had always fancied the apple on the pewter plate. তাৰপিছত ছোৱালীজনীয়ে গম পাইছিল যে মিছেছ ডাৰ্লিঙৰ জীয়েকে কিহৰ কথা কৈছিল আৰু the girl also remembers how much she was fascinated by apple on the pewter plate. Pewter মানে dark dull gray color like that of a metal color এনেকুৱা plate বহুত ভাল পাইছিলে মানে তাই সৰু থাকোতে. We use it for everything, she said. Once we even ate off the plates hanging there on the wall. I wanted to so much, but it wasn't anything special. So Mrs. Darling's daughter didn't realize that those antique things actually belonged to somebody else. So she kept on telling how they used those things on a regular basis. I had found the burn mark on the tablecloth. The girl looked questioningly at me. Yes, I said. You get so used to touching all these lovely things in the house, you hardly look at them anymore. You only notice when something is missing because it has to be repaired or because you have lent it. For example. Again, I heard the unnatural sound of my voice and I went on. I remember my mother once asked me if I would help her polish the silver. It was a very long time ago and I was probably bored that day, or perhaps I had to stay at home because I was ill. As she had never asked me before, I asked her which silver she meant, and she replied, surprised, that it was the spoons, forks, and knives, of course, and that was the strange thing. I didn't know the cutlery we ate of every day was silver. চ' মিছেছ ডৰ্লিঙৰ জীয়েকৰ আগত ছোৱালীজনীয়ে পাষ্ট ইনচিডেণ্ট এটাৰ কথা কয় যে এদিন তাইক মাকে চিলভাৰ পলিছ কৰিব মাতিছিল আৰু তেতিয়া তাই সুধিছিল কি চিলভাৰ বুলি। তেতিয়া তাইৰ মাকে কৈছিল যে চামুচবোৰ আৰু নাইফছবোৰ এইবোৰ চব বুলি। ডেট ৱাজ দ্য ডে ৱেন শ্বি কেম টু ন' ডেট দ্য কাটলেৰী দে এট অফ এভৰি ডে ৱাজ মেড অফ চিলভাৰ। The girl laughed again. I bet you don't know it is either. I looked intently at her. What we eat with? She asked. Well, do you know? She hesitated. She walked to the sideboard and wanted to open a drawer. I will look. It's in here. I jumped up. I was forgetting the time. I must catch my train. She had her hand on the drawer. Don't you want to wait for my mother? No, I must go. I walked to the door. The girl pulled the drawer open. I can find my own way. As I walked down the passage, I heard the jingling of spoons and forks. After listening to this incident, Mrs. Darling's daughter laughs. আৰু ছোৱালীজনীয়ে মিছেছ ডৰ্লিঙৰ জীয়েকক কয় যে I bet তুমিও নাজানা বুলি। তাই সেইটো কথা শুনি কনফিউজ হৈ যায় and goes to check. She opens the drawer, but she tries to open the drawer and the girl remembers that she needs to catch the train and denies to meet Mrs. Darling. At the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate. Marconi Street, it said. I had been at number 46. The address was correct, but now I didn't want to remember it anymore. I wouldn't go back there because the objects that are linked in your memory with the familiar life of former times instantly lose their value when served from them. You see them again in strange surroundings, and what should I have done with them in a small rented room with the shreds of blackout paper still hung along the windows and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in a narrow table drawer? I resolved to forget the address. Of all the things I had to forget, that would be the easiest. She walked down the passage and left the house. She again checks the address and makes a commitment to never return to the place and forget those things. She resolved to forget the address and moved on. She convinces herself that if those belongings would have been with her now, she could not have make them fit in her narrow room. So she also didn't find that fascinating that she used to find them when those belongings they had in their house once upon a time. So she tends to forget everything and move on. The chapter ends like this. And from this chapter, we can learn that this chapter is about human predicament after war. Predicament means state of condition. We can see the mental state of the girl, which was very unstable. She comes in search of her mother's belongings, but at the end, she leaves everything and tends to forget every memories attached to those belongings and moves on. She convinces herself to forget every memory that was attached to her homeland and belongings and start a new life. Thank you for watching.